Our topic is the trance as the doorway to the occult, dealing with its natural, magnetic, and spiritual methods of induction, and empowering as a consequence to show you what a wondrous and marvelous doorway into the unseen there is treasured within the life possibilities of all humanity. For we hold it as one of the cardinal principles of being that the constitution of humanity at large is practically a unit in its character, that there is no possibility pertaining to any one of the children of earth that is not also latent in all other of earth's children. The variations of development, the peculiarities and the idiosyncrasies of individual character, and the opportunities of exercise alone constitute the differing conditions which give to one a seeming excess of development and to another no apparent manifestation at all. But by and by, in the progress of humanity, when the laws of being are more correctly and truly understood, it will be found how each and all of you, within the measure of your capacities, in accordance with your possibilities, and in relation to your requirements, will be able to develop all the possibilities that are latent in humanity. Collectively, as well as individually, the mystery and all the results, ignorance and superstition shall be banished from the pathway, and the unseen and spiritual life of man, with all its qualities and attributes, shall stand revealed as plainly and as clearly to the understanding as do your surroundings in the external universe today. The trance condition is the warrant of death in the prophecy of futurity. It is, in its revelation of the higher capacities of human nature, the measure and certain indication, the hand post, as it were, upon the highway of eternal life, pointing to the mountains of wisdom that he perhaps, still enshrouded by the mist of ignorance, and thereby concealed from the understanding of humanity today. We are aware that this is a great and somewhat startling claim, but yet we think the matters we are about to present will more than justify it. For you will bear in mind that if death be an impossible gulf over which the spirit can never return to mortality, there can be no sort of evidence presented in this world that can tell you what is upon the other side of that gulf. But if there can be a miniature representation of, or a correspondence to, that phenomenon which is called death, then there is a vindication of death, an interpretation of its issues, and explanation of its consequences. And if that miniature representation can be experienced by the individual, and he return to human life and consciousness again, two ends are gained. First, the realization of an existence of himself apart from his external and material body with its outward consciousness. Secondly, his ability to triumph over the limitations of his material environments, and then return to all its possessions in their fullness and entirety. Thus you see that virtually the trance, which is this miniature representation of death, gives you the key by which you may transcend the environments of mortality and ascend into the domain of spirituality. It is indeed the doorway to the occult, to that which is hidden from the ordinary investigation and outward consciousness, a passageway from the realm of action upon the external side of life to the realm of action upon the internal side of life. But in every case, its opening depends upon your own organic constitutions, your mental, nervous, and spiritual possibilities and environments, the means upon which you will be dependent to open this portal for yourselves. All life, intelligence, and consciousness action, so far as man is concerned, is, as you know, a duality. It has its outward expression upon the plane of physical existence, as well as it has its interior or spiritual expressions, of which you alone are consciousness. All that your fellows outside of yourself can know of you is that amount of your spiritual self which expresses itself in your actions and your speech. But even these are covered up, obscured, and diverted by the external causes impinging upon your actions and life from day to day. Therefore, it is possible that one may grasp your hand, gaze into your eyes, and hear your voice day after day for years, and be no nearer knowing you than had you never met. But could you find a way by which you could enter into each other's essential nature, by which you could spiritually come in rapport, then it might be discovered that you were altogether a different kind of person beneath the outward seeming, that you had altogether a different identity, that there was a better part of you, a more wonderful part, a part removed from the external life, the spiritual part that was struggling and striving imperfectly, alas, in many cases, to make itself known through the outward manifestations of senses and thought and action. Some there are, more perhaps than might be expected, whose inner natures flash and glow through the outward forms of life and conduct, and these royal souls are among the leaders, heroes, and the nobler sorts of men. And when you clasp their hand, you feel the power of this inward something magnetically beating upon your own pulses, echoing in the chambers of your mind, and flashing before the windows of your own souls. But alas, there are better sorts of people are, in the main few and far between today. For this reason, the outward cares of life often blunt the dull, the finer sensibilities of human nature, so that but little of this better part of man can find expression in the daily life of humanity at large. But there is this doorway to your better selves. Not only is it true that you are sometimes as sealed books to your fellows, but you are also sealed books to a large extent to yourselves. Let us illustrate the point. You are engaged in a harsh round of toil. Duty pressures heavy upon you and weighs your spirit down, and you have no time or leisure for reflection or meditation. Every moment of your day is occupied, and at night, when you seek your couch for rest, brain and body are alike too tired to think or meditate, and you welcome as the best relief the oblivion sleep can give. But by and by there comes a time when your affairs charge, and you can rest, and then you begin to think. Reflection asserts her power, meditation becomes frequent. Loving influence is brewed upon your soul, and straightway you begin to realize there are facilities, powers, and possibilities in your nature that you have scarcely ever dreamed of before. Instructively, there is home into your consciousness, the recognition of a better part, and you wonder how it is that the spiritual part has been voiceless for all the preceding years. Sometimes this voice is called forth by what is called religious conviction. Sometimes it arises simply out of enthusiasm for a noble purpose, or at an interest in some great cause may kindle into action. With nearly all mankind, there is some time in their lives when this part asserts itself. Let us urge you by every power of persuasion not to hide this better part, but to obey its impulses, to cultivate its powers, and seek henceforth to rule your lives intelligently in harmony therewith. What is meant by the statement that the trance is the doorway to the occult? It is really the method by which you are enabled to solve the problem of death without dying, to come face to face with the realities of the immortal life without actually becoming an entity living therein. Is this true? Our answer is yes, for the experience abundantly substantiates it. The method of induction by which the trance can be established relates to the possibilities of persons inducing that state in themselves by themselves, to the possibility of the state being induced by another person upon them, and lastly to the possibility of the state being induced by the person not living in the world wherein the entranced person lives. These give us, as you will see, the natural, magnetic, and spiritual forms of induction. The last form might be disputed by those who are unacquainted with spiritual, psychological, or occult matters, because they will ask, how can it be possible that a being living in another grade of life altogether invisible and unseen to us can induce a psychological condition upon a person living in this world? There is no relationship, and therefore there can be no influence exerted. This argumently is falsely, it discloses ignorance rather than knowledge. For if, as we shall presently see, there is this other part of man, just referred to, the spiritual side of his nature, then such spiritual side must of necessity be related to, and will present a plane or point of contact for, the unseen inhabitants of the inner life, when they desire to produce the outward physiological effect dominated the trance. What are the first conditions to create that receptive and responsive condition in the human structure by which the trance in any form is rendered possible? In the first place, let us turn our glance to the physical conditions. The trance depends much more upon this than is usually supposed. It is generally thought that you must be willing to be entranced to desire it, but this is not all the question. It depends also to a large extent upon the physical conditions, and if those conditions are in a state of irritation, that irritation will certainly react upon the mental condition, and the passivity requested will be to that extent destroyed. Therefore, the first condition we would insist upon is the nearest possible approach to physical healthfulness. We know it is commonly urged that the trance is an abnormal condition, and that therefore the subject should be more or less in an abnormal condition of health. It is pointed out that the numbers of magnetic and spiritual subjects are persons whose health would not be considered good, and from that has arisen the argument that all subjects must necessarily be persons of abnormal health. This is a general proposition. However, it is radically wrong. That is, in so many cases today we are prepared to admit, but we repeat, it is radically wrong. The highest requirements of the human organism can only be attained when that organism is in its highest condition of health, and when harmoniously operating in every department. The highest condition of health does not mean a gross physical man, where all the mental and spiritual is sacrificed to a splendid animal body. A perfect condition of physical health is cleanliness and harmoniousness in every department. Therefore, the stomach, the liver, the various departments of the internal viscera, the circulation of blood, the blood itself, the heart and lungs, and all the vital organisms should be in that perfectly clean and healthy state wherein the individual realizes the fullest, completest benefits from being alive. When this is established, the first step has been taken. We need to remind you that all would be foul and clog the system must be avoided, that you must pay the closest attention to personal sanitation and to everything that pertains to the well-being of the human organization. If you wish to pass through the doorway to the trance into the domain of the occult, you must be prepared to make some sacrifices in order to gain the privileges you desire. But remember that after all, these sacrifices are most of conventional forms. You must be prepared to sacrifice many of the enjoyments and privileges that conventional civilizations accords to you, and we frankly tell you that a great many of these privileges are a bane to you rather than a blessing. Then the next question is the mental state, for physical health, harmony, and cleanliness are but stepping stones to mental cleanliness and harmony. Without this condition of the mentality, the desired end will generally be more or less defeated. Sometimes it is necessary to temporarily surrender even the senses, also your likes and dislikes, to school yourself for the time of submission. The apprentice has to submit to the guidance of a master hand, that he may be taught to accomplish the results that the training of the master will enable him to reach. So you, as an apprentice in the occult, must temporarily be learners by pupils, must subject yourselves to the greater will and experience. Therefore, the mind must be calm, harmonious, and submissive. And when the positive part of the mind and the will are thus in a passive condition, the spiritual forces will be conditioned in like manner. And you will find that all the vital forces, instead of vibrating with these intense activities, the characteristics, their movements, when the individual is acting for himself or when all the forces of the body are in full sway, will be reduced to the lowest rate of vibratory movement. In some places, the vibratory movement can scarcely be detected, being as the imperceptible movement of the still waters in a pool. Then we find the pulsing of the superior forces in the brain becomes calm. The beautiful light, sufficing this organ, loses the intensity of its brilliancy and activity, and settling as a golden glory, it seems as if waiting for something to occur. Then this light appears like the sweet summer haze settling over the field before the evening breeze begins to stir. But if we look a little deeper, we shall find there is a movement bringing to express itself, and that movement commences directly the first attempt is made to induce the trance by the aid of human magnetism. When the operator concentrates his mind upon the subject, and either by his gaze or the passage of his hand discharges from him that vital fluid, which we may call psychic force, that fluid impinges upon the psychic sphere surrounding the subject and produces a commotion therein, which motion is taken up by the muscular and nervous forces and is by them carried to the stomach, the lungs, and the superior organ, the brain. The reaction from the stomach and lungs produces a singular disturbance in the lower brain or cerebellum, and the distance of this lower brain exerts a sort of extension, which in its operation affects the upper superior portions of the brain and seems temporarily to excite it and forces therein. This commotion, besides being an excitation proceeding from the lower to the upper brain, creates also a further reaction upon the entire viscera of the subject, for the excitement of the brain is communicated to the internal organs through the various ganglia and the great sympathetic nerve. Frequently, this reaction produces a feeling of nausea of the stomach, followed by a species of spasm or convulsion that runs through the entire nervous system. Hence, you may observe that the subject gasps and yawns. The face becomes flushed, tears flow from the eyes, the breathing becomes heavy, and there will be indications of sickness and spasms, excitement and hysteria, all because of this reactive influence over the lower brain operating upon the sympathetic nerve and ganglia, and through those descending into the internal organs produce reactions there. You will have observed that some magnetizers find it best to direct the psychic force to the pit of the stomach, while others find it best to direct it to the heart and lungs, others to look into the eye, others to merely operate upon the frontal brain at first, others between the shoulders and upon the nape of the neck, where they place the fingers to discharge the psychic fluid into the system. No operator will confine himself to any one particular method, and it may be that the necessities of certain subjects will demand that the operator shall proceed in none of the ways we have just referred to, but in any of the case, the result obtained is the same, and precisely identical, whatever method is pursued to induce it. The result is the withdrawal of action of the muscular and nervous forces from the external centers of the operation and sensation, and the concentration of them upon the brain itself for the purpose of effecting of awakening of the interior powers. The trance, of course, purposifies, by an artificial compelling, shall we call it, a sensation of external sensation and a withdrawal of all the ordinary methods of expression and an opening of the interior perception belonging to the spiritual nature. When all these results have been carried forward to a certain degree, the subject will be induced into the magnetic state or mesmeric trance, which represents approximately that condition the human structure will be in when it's finally dead. Then a further process is required to put a body to sleep, to lock up its senses in the embrace of an artificial death, to seal up the ears and mouth and eyes, is after all but a poor process without the ultimate result of awakening the consciousness upon the inner plane. But when such awakening is accomplished, then the individual becomes clairvoyant. The spiritual counterparts of the physical senses are then awakened so that the spiritual eye will see spiritual things. The spiritual ear will receive the vibrations of the spiritual atmosphere. The spiritual brain will respond to the thoughts of the spiritual realm. And the individual being thus partially induced through the doorway into the occult realms, into the realms concealed from the outer senses, will see and hear and know and have a rational understanding of the conditions belonging to that which is called the occult realm of life. Can the knowledge of these things be transmitted to other consciousness and be retained and remembered by the individual when the magnetic process is reversed and the locked forces of the body are again sent upon their usual mission? Yes, by the will of the operator, the experiences of the sleeping subject can be directed to the channels of the mind, to the chambers of the memory, through which and in which these interior experiences can be stored, so that when the individual is brought back again to the normal state, slowly as the mind clears, and he is able again to handle the machinery of his outer consciousness, he can bring to memory the facts and expressions of his interior state and tell you what he saw, what he did, and where he went. But you will ask here, through scarcely necessity, how are we to know that when the individual is thus inducted magnetically into the trance state, he really has seen and heard and known things that do not belong to this outer world state of ours? When he tells you, and can and does many times, of those whom the world hath lost sight of for years, who perhaps have been mourned as gone forever, when he brings you some fact that upon further inquiry clearly proves he has seen the world wherein departed humanity exists, the testimony must be accepted just the same as the testimony of the traveler who visits a distant country and returns to tell you of its people and nature. The constant induction of magnetic trance is an experience not to be sought. Any method or power that always demands reliance upon it is a dangerous method, an injurious power. It teaches you the lesion of dependence rather than the independence. It teaches you to be always leaning upon somebody stronger than yourself, rather than impressing upon you the duty of developing your own strength so that you may walk alone. But as a means of opening the door, as a means of carrying you forward to the occult and bringing you face to face with the facts and purposes belonging to it, the magnetic induction of the trance is primarily and preeminently a necessity in the great majority of cases. Now, when the psychologist grows just a trifle wiser and learns a little more, not so very much, he will be able to take another step forward and be able to exalt his subjects to a greater degree of value to the world. When he has induced them into the magnetic state, he will then teach them how to understand that the state while they are in it, so that they themselves may induce it by first showing you how they may realize themselves from it. He will be able to say, I have opened the door for you, I have explained the nature upon the lock to you, and if you follow my instructions, you will be able to open the door and close the door whenever you desire. The key is yours. You can use it, and the bolts of the lock will ever respond to it. If another can induce the trance for you, why should you not be able to enter the state yourself unaided? What another can do for you, you can do for yourself. It is only the knowing of the how that stands in the way. How, then, can you do this? Concentration of your mind requires meditation and a determined effort upon your part to withdraw yourself from external extractions, influences, and sensations. These are the necessity stages towards the self-induction and of the trance, and when the due attention to the other circumstances and surrounding, you can seclude yourselves and concentrate your minds upon the determination to withdraw from the external life, from the external senses of the body, from the external desires and activities of daily life, and retire within yourself. You will then find yourself seeking in the right direction for what you wish to accomplish. How often do you do this, particularly when meditating or while indulging in pleasant reveries? There you sit, lost to the other life and senses, within yourself and forgetful of all around you, even sometimes forgetting you are living in this world. If you add to this an intelligent desire and an earnest purpose, then you will see your outward senses and completely pass into the realm of the impalpable and the occult, and gain upon knowledge by your own efforts of that which here to you were dependent upon another to obtain. Some will ask, is it safe, is it dangerous, would I ever wake up again? When you have been trained in the first manner referred to and made spiritually conscious of your powers in this direction, when in the magnetic trance you have been made acquainted with the machinery you have to use, there is no danger, but every safety, and when you are thus informed and thus able to induce the superior conduction for yourself, you will not only have the realm of the occult open to you in its purely spiritual interpretation, but you will have the occult in its material aspect also, for you will come in contact with the finer physical forces of life and be able to visit remote localities in mind and spirit, be able to travel the broader world over, and gain an immense amount of knowledge in regard to the occult side of terrestrial existence. The psychological phenomenon will, in their effects and character, be somewhat similar in this degree to what they were in the first. But we warn you here, as we warned you in regard to the preceding points, that there is a danger to be considered. If a continual dependence upon another's will and help are calculated to debilitate the body, so also is it true that the continued exercise of the subjective powers of your nature will likely be injurious and debilitate the outward powers of your nature. In other words, it is improper and unwise, most improper and most unwise, to sacrifice any department of your nature for the welfare and especial development of some other department. Therefore, beyond satisfying yourselves of the reality of your spiritual natures, gaining the practical demonstrations we have referred to, or utilizing this wonderful power for special and particular necessities, we counsel you not to extract yourself from the external life and its duties too frequently, not to neglect the requirements of the outer world, but at all times and under all circumstances remember that your first duty is that plane of being upon which you have presently reside. Then we come to the spiritual form of the induction of trance. We have told you by reason of fact that the man is a spiritual being. Because he has these spiritual powers, he is of necessity related to the spiritual world and its inhabitants, and therefore there is a point of contact before the two conditions. Now we have to deal with the point of contact referred to. The spirit people are like yourselves. They have a rational existence. They possess like powers. They are surrounded with spiritual and psychic auras or magnetic spheres, as are yourselves. Each one and every one of you is surrounded by a magnetic, psychic, or spiritual atmosphere, and the character, color, and vibrations of that sphere are all visible to the observing spirit who can see therein your own spiritual character and enfoldment. These are wonderful and important truths, and when you are inclined to deride your fellows, let that counter-reflection come to you, that there are eyes looking down upon you that can read your very soul and know all the truth, what your natures and dispositions really are. The spiritual method of inducing the trance is this, and perhaps to make it clear, we will give you an illustration within our own personal knowledge, granting that we have all the conditions previously referred to in retaliation to health, harmony, and cleanliness of body. We have still to add another ingredient, which is cleanliness of mind. It is a most ferocious doctrine that the mental and moral character of a spiritual subject has nothing at all to do with the phenomenon presented throughout that subject. The very reverse is the case. For when you enter into the higher consideration of physical phenomenon, everything depends upon the mental, moral, and spiritual cleanliness of the individual subject. Bear that the truth in your minds for the counter theory is degrading and debasing, a most dangerous and damaging doctrine which hinders all physical progression and spiritual development. The spirit mesmerists, being in the subjective world, have to commence their operations from the subjective plane and work outwards, as already stated. Hence then, we have to operate upon the counterparts of the physical body as presented in the spiritual body, and to receive these, we commence operation upon the outer magnetic sphere by direct its effects to the spiritual or under the side of human being. Now this may be accomplished physiologically by directing the mind or thoughts of the controlling powers towards the affections, for it is by working through the affectional sphere we are able to come in contact with the physical condition of the affectional propensities. The connecting point, so to speak, between the animal and the higher side of human nature is the affections, and through the affections, the outer physical organization is reached. And then, control being thus established in the lower or basilar brain, the effect can be continued into the superior and frontal brains. Then, if the manipulation is purely and solely for a mechanical result, instead of turning the forces into the superior and intellectual brain, the flow of force is continued into the nervous department, and from the nervous outward into the muscular departments, and thus by having the sympathetic nervous system under control and influence, we are gradually able to withdraw the outer forces and force them inwardly, and in case of the human mesmerist, and thus little by little we are able to suspend the active operations of external sensation and consciousness, and induce the condition of sleep that you know as a spiritual magnetic trance. The work begins internally in this case, progresses externally, and then reacts and turns inward again. Thus you will observe the induction of the trance upon the human subject by the inhabitants of the spiritual world is a somewhat more complicated process than the process when accomplished by a human agency. We have to work from within outwardly, and then from the outward to within. The condition being thus induced, the direction of action entirely depends upon the results that are desired. Those results are limited by the possibilities of the organism that we have in control. When it is a case of personification, it is a synthetic nervous and a mechanical control, which being associated with a suitable and plastic organization enables the operating spirit to correctly duplicate himself in features, in tone of voice, in character of speech, and modes of action through the organism he is controlling. The trance is induced by natural magnetic and spiritual agencies having now been stated to you. Let us point one or two conclusions that we will trust show you its utility. The spiritual induced trance is the highest form of entrancement outside of the natural or self-induced trance that you can have. It is possible, of course, as you know, by the use of various narcotics to induce the condition of trance, and by such abnormal means produce similar results to those already detailed. But here we wish again to caution you in the most impressive manner that we can that all such agencies are radically bad and injurious. They are destructive to those tissues of the body, and they deteriorate the organisms as a whole. They lower the morale and mental character and strength of the individual, and if you once become a prey to their use and subject of their influence, it will need, in a great majority of cases, a larger amount of willpower than the individual is generally capable of to break the chain you have thus placed around your neck. Indeed, you will have absolutely conjured up and imposed upon yourself a devil that will claim you as a victim, in all probability so long as you remain upon the mortal plane. The spiritually induced trance brings you individually into the closest relationships to spiritual personality and consciousness upon the inner plane of life. the individual then becoming to a very large extent one with the spiritual peoples of the spirit world. When mediumship is better understood and the character of the trance more clearly comprehended, the individual who is controlled, as the saying is, will be able to return to the external life benefited and refreshed and freighted with a vast variety of experiences and information, which information and experience, in a majority of cases, he now possesses, but not being trained in the character of the trance, not having physical education, he is unable to transmit it in the external side of memory, and so bring it into his active consciousness when he returns to the ordinary state. One other suggestion, which will be more clearly illustrated in a further lecture, in regard to the induction of the trance by the artificial methods used by the magicians and sorcerers of ancient and modern times, we only wish to suggest that there is general psychological conditions established by conforming to the requirements and gatherings which such phenomenon occur, whereby a mental atmosphere is created and a physical condition established, sufficiently powerful in their effects upon sensitive natures to induce the trance in their cases as the result of the conditions thus created. Here, then, we have established the fact that the trance can be induced by three different methods: by another for you, by yourself for yourself, by spirits from the spirit world. We have found that the induction of this trance in either case brings you into relationship with the spirit world, with the spirit people, and with the spiritual powers of yourself. We have found that this corresponds to death, for death will do no more for you than the trance, save only in this one respect: death results in your absolute departure from material ties, while the trance but temporarily releases you from the conditions of the material existence and enables you to return to outward life again. The trance, many inform you as a consequence of your experience while therein that there is another realm of being, that there is another self within you, that there are other people beyond you, those other people beings, those who one time lived amongst you, and who will pass through the valleys and shadows of death into the morning land beyond. These evidences, these proofs indeed, make the trance an artificial and partial death, enabling you consciously and understandingly to enter into the spiritual world, and, as already stated, enabling you also on the physical side of life to come into contact with the occult powers and forces of nature. You are thus brought in contact with the subjective side of material existence, as well as with the spiritual side of life which lies beyond the boundaries of the mortal state. Thus have we clearly shown you that the trance is the doorway of the occult, to that occult which ordinary experience and education declares entirely concealed or even denies the existence of. The possibilities we have referred to as the doorway through which you may pass to the occult bear no relation, either in strength or beauty, to that deeper and sublimer doorway of death itself. That great gateway is gemmed with radiant beauties, twinned with divinous flowers, shines with the purest lustre, and with the faltering footsteps approach it, as the outward senses vanish from you, and the outward form, like a discarded mantle, falls upon the floor of mortal life, and you last free and uncumbered and enter in a past that portal, you then behold its glories fully disclosed to you, and in that spiritual awakening you shall realize all the bright pleasures and sweet experiences of your mortal life. When perchance sleeping the sleep of nature, or in that other sleep of the magnetic state, or the spiritually induced trance, you have had views of the fair country and mingled with its happy people. All these shall come back to you in vivid reality as you enter into that sublime and beautiful occult world. All shall then be made plain and clear. But even here, by the trance, this can be done for you today. We repeat that the trance, either in its magnetic, natural, or spiritually induced form, is God's evidence and nature's indication of the utility of death and the reality of a mortal life.